Good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball. It's an honor to be your MC today. Humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice.
Oh, good morning. I have a reading this morning. It's about death, and the title is Mortal Thoughts by Chris Horner. Death is a fact. Nothing can be done about the fact of death. But what about the thought of death? That is another matter. What do we do with the idea of death? We are all going to die. We live with this thought. We get used to it, and then we manage to put it out of our mind. One way we do this is to think that since we do not grieve for the years in the past in which we did not exist, then why should we concern ourselves about there being a future to which we will not exist, in which we will not exist? But this is exactly what we fear, no future. We tend to project ourselves forward, and so the future that we are bound to miss weighs more for us than a past that we never had. We want to know that there will be a tomorrow, but we will one day cease to exist. We will be erased. We will vanish forever. That's what death is, gone forever, no matter how we adorn it with phrases like passing away or passing on or kicking the bucket. The end of our lives comes closer every day. What will death be like? What will it be like going into a dreamless sleep and never waking up? Well, so much for our own death. How do we see the deaths of other people? This is just as problematic. Most of us know or knew people who are now dead. They related to us, looked at us, talked to us, and now they are gone forever. How do we cope with that? Doesn't it seem that here is something almost indecent in the way in which we can get on with our lives, play with our phones, drink coffee, go on vacations, follow football, when death has disappeared someone that we cared about? How dare we? The fact that life must end is terrible, but what's the alternative? Would you want to live forever? Would not an eternal life make everything that we do completely pointless? Without finitude, without death, life would be hard to bear, going on forever and ever. Yes, there are persons whose presence we would like to experience again if we could. We miss them. And now I add, this is my last sentence. But there are also persons whose absence we welcome. Hitler is gone, but we still have people like Trump. There is no doubt that absence of some people would make for a better world.
Thank you, Lawrence, for a very timely and thoughtful reading. And in honor of your reading, I changed one word in my intro today. You'll see. We have the perfect presenter this morning to honor Daniel Dennett, who died. I had said he passed away, but he died now in April of this year. Dennett is known as one of the four horsemen of modern atheism. His world-renowned books, Consciousness Explained and Darwin's Dangerous Idea, are must-reads for the intellectually curious. Mr. Orians will be joining us via Zoom and also on video today. You'll see Darwin's Dangerous Idea will be the main topic today, and Gordon will guide our thinking into the deep implications of Darwin's basic idea. In this process, we may topple the pedestal on which we think we stand. Gordon Orians is a Professor Emeritus of Biology at the University of Washington. He was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1989 and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1990. Let's have a warm and rousing ovation from our live audience at the Friendly House, and a warm yet muted welcome from our Zoom audience for Mr. Gordon Orians.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure again to be with you. Thinking about that, I'm reminded about the little clip. What did Beethoven do in his grave? Decompose. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you and to share with you my thoughts about why Darwin's idea was really so dangerous. Most people think that, okay, we now have natural selection to get on with business, but Daniel Dennett, as a philosopher, is one who explores deeply the meaning of stuff. And he has pointed out, and I agree with him, that Darwin's idea was genuinely dangerous. And we're going to, in this talk of mine, explore since Daniel Dennett recently died, he can't speak for himself, but I think what I'm going to do, and going to say about why Darwin's idea is so dangerous is quite exactly what Dan Dennett would tell you if he were alive. So without further ado, let's go to my little talk about Dan Dennett and Darwin's dangerous idea.
So anyway, you may be intrigued by the title. I assume that most of you have heard about and know something about Charles Darwin. I will probably convince you in the course of this talk that most of what you think you know isn't true, because the reporting on this and the way it's in the media get things all distorted. But I'm quite sure you probably don't know and not heard of Daniel Dennett. So before we go on any further, let's talk about Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher. Born in the United States, spent most of his career in the philosophy department at Tufts University in Boston, and the same university where my son has a professorship, and his office is just down the hill from my son's, and that's where I have met with him. Daniel Dennett is one of these philosophers that realized if we're going to really talk about evolution and what's going on in the world, you really have to understand the science. So he invested very heavily in learning about biological science, genetics, natural selection, everything. And here's the book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And this is written by somebody who knows more about evolution and natural selection than 90% of biologists. Okay, that may be damnation by faint praise, I'm not sure. But also, Dan Dennett, as a philosopher, is interested in a lot of things. He's a part of the group that formed the Freedom from Religion. He's been very much interested in the secular society and developing, working with pastors who no longer believe what they're teaching and trying to help them transition. He's also very much interested in a materialistic world. How can ethics and freedom evolve? And he's got a little book there on the far end I brought is because freedom evolves. And he said in a deterministic world, how you can get enough of what we will call freedom worth having. He's also very much interested in and critical of the fact that often religious people and their ideas hide behind a veil of ignorance. And they say, this can't be investigated because it's my religion. And Dan Dennett is a great fan of getting rid of that. And he's got this book here I brought is called Breaking the Spell. And that is how can we, when the religion is actually making claims about how the world works, these are claims that are amenable to scientific investigation and should be handled that way, but they won't do it. And he's been very active in trying to get the spell broken, how to open it up. And you know, he's not done very well. One last thing here. If you don't want to invest much time in that, this is a little book by someone else. It's called Daniel Dennett, and it's just part of a series of contemporary American thinkers. And this is a view of Daniel Dennett as seen by somebody else. And that's always dangerous because, as we know, throughout human history, leaders have tended to have more trouble with their followers than with their enemies. So, but this is pretty good, okay? So that's Daniel Dennett. And he is very worth knowing. He's really a profound thinker. And this book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, is things. One of the things he talks about, he compares cranes versus skyhooks. And the crane is the way we build this up, knowing the stuff the way he thinks we ought to do. But when people have trouble, one of the first things they want to do is bring in a skyhook to help them up. And that's one of the first, and that indicates how well he can express things. And one of the things, scientists are often critical of philosophers because they don't discover anything. Well, that's true, but that's not their job. Their job is to raise questions, analyze, and help you think. And then it realizes this Darwin's danger. He isn't explaining evolution. He's showing these are the things that scientists need to do to provide answers to these things. So that's Daniel Dennett. And the bottom line is, I think he's really worth knowing. I think he's one of the intellectual giants in this country in the last century. And he just died a couple of weeks ago. And he was the last of one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Richard Dawkins and he and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens. And now with Dennett gone, Richard Dawkins is the only one that's left of those four. Anyway, so now, since Daniel Dennett isn't here and can't speak, what you're going to get is why Gordon Orians thinks Darwin's idea was dangerous. Okay, and I think this is a lot like what Daniel Dennett would tell you, but he's not here to defend himself. So right now I happen to agree with him that Darwin's idea is dangerous, and you'll have to take it from me now. And to give you the punchline first and then work back, it's Darwin's idea was really dangerous. Oh, this is The Origin of Species, by the way, the book, and I will quote from it later. But Darwin's idea is really dangerous for two reasons. First is it says there's creativity and all sorts of design, and there's no designer. We can get, and he's saying, I'm going to give you all this beautiful variety of biological world, and it doesn't need a designer. And everybody thought there had to be a designer where you design, and I've got a mechanism, and I'm going to explain how we can get design without a designer. And that's a real flip of causal thinking in Western society. If there's design out there, wings are for flying, well, somebody had to design it. And Darwin, for the first time in the history of Western thinking, says, no, I got a mechanism. It will give you design without a designer. And we'll describe what that mechanism is in a few minutes. The other reason it's so dangerous, it says, look, you brainy ape, you're just one little twig on this marvelous tree of life. The world wasn't made for you. You're just a part of this process, and get used to it like all the rest of us. And so that idea, what is happening is it's knocking us off a throne, but elevating the rest of life. And that's pretty dangerous. And whereas I think the first of the two reasons is far more important, guess which one has attracted the most attention? The other one. Okay, and we'll see how and that's still being played out today. So that's the introduction. So let's go on to what did Darwin really do, and what was the state of the world when he did it? Well, by the time, and Darwin was 150 years ago when he was doing all this, and it was pretty well accepted that there was biological evolution. All the real thinkers thought the problem was how did it happen? And nobody had a clue how it happened. And the geologists began to realize that the Earth was pretty old, that the idea of really only 4,000 years or so from Genesis was wrong. But looking at the Grand Canyon Wall, you could see there was a lot of time there, but they had no idea how much time. and all they could tell the changes, what was happening, was the animal fossils in the rocks. So all the names are Proterozoic, Cenozoic, Zoic, named after the animal fossils in the rock. And it wasn't until 1900 that we learned how to tell how old things were. And that was a contribution made by a French woman, Marie Curie. And she discovered radioactivity. And radioactivity is giving us the means for aging things. And everything is aged now by using different radioactive decay of different elements. And I won't go into it, but the point is, it was 1900 when we learned how to tell how old things. So Darwin didn't know how old things were. Nobody did. The geologist sort of said, and the only book he carried with him was Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology. And Darwin was really quite a geologist. And if you read The Voyage of the Beagle, which is a wonderful read, you can see how his ideas were developing. He talks a lot about geology, making geological observations. And in fact, he developed a theory for how coral reefs formed, and that's still regarded as correct. So Darwin talks a lot about geology. He was a part of this effort. We think biological evolution has occurred, but how did it happen? And actually, there were other thinkers that have thought about the famous French anatomist Buffon had developed a theory. This is how it happened, and it's often pictured as the giraffe straining its neck to reach up to the leaves of an acacia tree, and the giraffe that is able to stretch and get its neck up there and feet up a little higher had a benefit of a better condition, and it was better at reproducing. Interesting idea. The trouble is it's all wrong, because that doesn't change the genes, and what the giraffe is going to pass on to its offspring has nothing to do with how much dad or mom stretch their necks. It's a great idea, but it's wrong. But in all credit, he was trying. He was working on it, and everybody was having trouble figuring this out. And Darwin. And everybody thinks, he went to the Galapagos Islands and saw the finches and thought of evolution. No, he got it all screwed up. He messed his finches up. John Gould and the ornithologist at the British Museum had to straighten him out. But so Darwin was influenced by what he saw there in the relationships, but he didn't get it right then, and he struggled a long time. But finally, this is what the idea he came up with. We knew something, that there were genes. We didn't know what they were, how they worked, but we knew there were chromosomes, and we knew that they were dividing, and you had to do duplication and stuff for every reproduction. So Darwin realized that, okay, there has to be duplication of the genetic material a couple times during every life cycle. And these are not likely to be perfect. They're not likely to be error-free. And most of them that are wrong, or they're errors, are going to be disadvantageous. And he said they're going to die out quickly because the individuals that pick those up are not going to be healthy. But a few of them might actually improve things. And that those then, the individuals that inherited those variations might survive better, have more kids, and if that continued for a while, you'd get evolutionary change. And so it's the fundamental idea is it's simple and depressing in a way. It's DNA. We say DNA copying errors. Now he didn't know DNA, but it is a theory of copying errors, that most of which are not helpful, but a few of which are. And Thomas Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog, read it and said, "How stupid of me not to have thought of that." But he was wrong. It was really hard to think of, and Darwin struggled, and nobody had thought. It's one of these things after he told the answer was, "Why didn't I think of it?" Well, it's one of those things that's maybe somewhat obvious after the fact, but it sure as hell wasn't before. So this is the kind of thing that Darwin mentioned. Now, and so he had all of this book says The Origin of Species by Natural Selection is really one of the worst titled book in history. It has nothing to do with the origin of species. All it does is saying that species can change, and it has no example of natural selection because there weren't any yet. Okay, that's not Darwin's fault. There weren't any because nobody had thought of it yet. But Darwin says this is a testable idea, and we spent a lot of time in the 150 years testing it. So that's what Darwin proposed, and Darwin was a fiddler. And he monkeyed around with it, and he had been working on this for a long time after he got back from the Beagle. But he was very cautious. He was a cautious man, but he was married. He was very concerned about his wife. He was married to Emma Wedgwood. Yes, that Wedgwood. And they were very much in love, had kids. And she was his first cousin. And we all know we all know now if you have an outbred population that start inbreeding, this is trouble. Sort of recessive things are likely to come up, and they actually had a little bit of problem with their kids, actually. But he was really worried. He loved his wife, and she was very devout, and he was afraid. And I think we don't know how long Darwin would have fiddled around with this until a very shocking event occurred. And this is now known in history as the letter from Ternate. And that's the island. It's from the island of we now know as Sulawesi in the East Indies. And there was another biologist out there by the name of Alfred Russel Wallace out there, and he was very poor, and he was making a living by collecting plants and animals and shipping back and selling them to people in England. So he was a very astute observer of the stuff going on. What was this? And one period he was recovered, laid out with malaria back, and he wrote this letters he sent to Charles Darwin, which we now know the letter from Ternate, in which he made a perfect statement of the theory of natural selection. And Darwin was just petrified. He had been working, he said, I've been scooped. This guy's got it. And it's a perfect statement. If you read it, it's really good. But Darwin's friends knew he was working on it. And so they arranged for a meeting of the Royal Society. Darwin quickly made a presentation, and Wallace's paper was read, and both men were created, given credit for the theory of natural selection. And then Darwin worked like hell to produce this right away afterward. And this was intended to be the shorter version for something longer. Fortunately, we're spared to the longer one. This is all we need. But Alfred Russel Wallace forced the issue. And if it hadn't, we don't know how long. It could have gone on for a long time because Darwin was really fiddling around with it. And Darwin gets all the credit, but don't feel too sorry for Alfred Russel Wallace, because he was the founder of another discipline, biogeography. And he was out there in the Indies, and he noted that he could sit on the island of Lombok and look over to Java, and there were elephants and bears and monkeys. And look the other way, in the other direction, he could see it. There were cockatoos and marsupials. And he recognized this is an incredible thing. And he figured out what it was, that looking to the west, the Sunda Shelf, where Borneo, Sumatra, and all these islands are, very shallow water. And during the peak of the glaciation, when sea levels dropped, you could walk all over those. So they're populated with big mammals from all over the thing. And sea level went up, and now it's isolated. But deep water going the other direction, and Wallace figured out that mammals could get there, and mammals are rather poor crossing salt water. and other than bats can fly, and bats got through, but he correctly figured this out, and he's the father of biogeography. And if you take it, that we still in the literature, so there's Wallace's line between these two, and so Wallace was a great genius. Darwin gets all the credit, which is okay, but Wallace got his, and he's the father of biogeography, and it's a wonderful discipline. I had the pleasure of teaching it for about 10 years at the university. It's wonderful to study why plants and animals are found where they are and not where else, and how these distribution patterns have come about. And just one little aside here. I'm tempted to asides because the asides are so absolutely fascinating, and you'll bear with me that biogeography, all the early stuff was before plate tectonics. The continents were all assumed to be where they are, and so you should see what the biogeographers went through to try to explain everything without any movement of continents, special bridges. I mean, it was amazing. And if you read the biogeography literature before plate tectonics, which is a lot of it, because remember, acceptance of plate tectonics, that's in my adult lifetime too. This is all recent. The discovery of plate tectonics made all of previous biodiversity by theorizing irrelevant, and the discipline had to redo itself. And the last group of scientists that refused to believe in plate tectonics were biogeographers. Surprise, huh? Okay, so, science is a form of human behavior, okay? And it's got all the warts. It's wonderful. It's exciting, but there it is. It's got all the warts and things. So anyway, but in general, then there was this big dispute, and all the dispute was about really, so am I a monkey, kind of thing, that are we dethroned, and not about the real important thing of design without a designer, which is what it ought to have been about. That's not what concerned this Homo sapiens. And there were big debates, and there were, Huxley who was Darwin's bulldog. Darwin was a very quiet man. He was sick a lot. He may have gotten Chagas disease while in Brazil, but he was pretty sick and didn't do much. But Huxley was his bulldog, and they had a debate with Bishop Wilberforce, who once said, "On which side from the monkey are you descended? Your father's side or your mother's side?" And all of this wonderful. But the point is that what attracted most of the attention was not what I think was the most important thing. Was this thing. And it still goes on, as we will see. We're still playing that game. So anyway, that said, then biologists went to work in discovering and testing Darwin's ideas and finding all sorts of new examples of natural selection. We start building up a literature, but Darwin didn't stop there. He wrote a number of other books, and one of the books was on how earthworms change the nature of the soil. And he performed experiments, putting little discs out in his garden and watching how fast earthworms buried them. Darwin was the first experimental ecologist. He didn't know he was. The field hadn't been invented, but Darwin founded the science of ecology, although he didn't know it, and the first books in ecology came out about 40 years later. So he also thought more about natural selection and wrote a book, The Expression of the Emotions in Animals and Man. And this is a foundation book for comparative and evolutionary psychology. It's an amazing book to read this. He sent letters out to all over the world, how people expressed and everything. But he developed a theory of sexual selection, that a lot of traits were selected, favored because they helped you in gaining access to a mate. And this now it's all accepted. Of course, there's sexual selection, big deal, right? It was really, really, really problematic because guess what? Who was making the discriminations and driving it? Females. Think of Victorian men. Women are driving this and they're not good enough to vote now and they're running evolution? No way. And so, the sexual selection really hit rough ground, and it was a long time before it got accepted. And I've given you my interpretation of what it is, but I think that's what it is. Again, that females are doing this? No. The females aren't going to be that smart, Okay, but we now know that the way sexual selection works in most of these, it is primarily female-driven. Okay, so Darwin is continuing and doing interesting stuff. A lot of people are developing new ideas and following this out, but there's a one big gorilla in the room. That's genetics. Because Darwin believed, unlike everybody did, in blending inheritance. The offspring will be intermediate between the parents. And this is what you see, since most traits that you wanted to look at are determined by many, many different genes, that's what it kind of looks like. But the problem with blending inheritance is that every generation you lose half of your variability. So variability disappears really fast. And Darwin knew that all of his ideas depended on variability. And he was looking, you could see all this variability out there. What preserved this variability? And Darwin knew that something was wrong with genetics. He spent a lot of time trying to develop a theory of genetics. It's called pangenetics. And it was a colossal failure. And we now look at it just historical and say, okay, he recognized the problem. Sorry, he couldn't figure out the answer. But the interesting thing was the answer was available. At the time, the answer was available. At the same time that this was going on, there was a little monk in a monastery in the city of Brünn in Austria who got interested in genetics and was testing genetic ideas with pea plants in his garden. And so this is Gregor Mendel, the man with brilliant genius, and he founded the science of the modern science of genetics begins with the publication of Mendel's paper. And so so you get white peas and red peas. He doesn't get pink peas. He gets white and pink. The variability is preserved. And so what Mendel shows, and the experiments show, that no, the genes don't blend. It's particular. The variability is maintained. And what Mendel's experiments show that variability doesn't decay. It's maintained unless something acts to decrease it. So there's no problem in variability being preserved. Now, and the big question is, did Darwin read? He could have read. It was not, but whether or not Darwin, and the point is that nobody who read Mendel's paper figured out how important it was. And I'm very disappointed because nobody paid any attention. And apparently he went on into monastery administration and probably was kind of sad. And it wasn't until after he died. And when that happened, that was 1900. And a Dutch geneticist, Hugo de Vries, read the original paper and said, wow, there it is. There's the variability. That's the one. But then what happened? Then it was all genetics. We don't need Darwin. It's all genetics. And Darwin went into a decline. Nobody paid any attention to Darwin then until around 1930, when three brilliant biologists figured out that Mendel and his experiments provided the problem that solved Darwin's problem, and bringing the two of them together made us the modern synthesis. And this is about 1930, 32, three people. One of them, two in Britain and one in the United States. And one of them was R.A. Fisher, who published an amazing book, The Genetical Theory of Natural Selection, which is one of the great books in evolutionary biology. And he's also the inventor of modern statistics. Brilliant man. The other was J.B.S. Haldane, who was quite a flamboyant character. And one story is he was supposedly at a dinner party and sitting next to a clergyman from the Church of England, who asked him, "What have you learned from the study of creation? What does it tell you about the Creator?" And Haldane is supposed to have quipped, he was inordinately fond of beetles. In fact, there are more species of beetles than any other kinds of insects. So, and the third was Sewell Wright in the United States, and he worked on the inheritance of coat color in guinea pigs. He lived a long time. I actually met him. He was about 95, and was just publishing his last paper, and still smart. And he had some sort of a genetic problem, and so they refused to give him life insurance. Boy, did they miss out on that one. So anyway, these three. So what happened? These three people conceived of the modern synthesis, what brought together Mendel and Darwin. And see, that span, that happened same time I was born. So all of this has happened within my lifespan. So much of what happened and what is the burst of stuff that has made evolutionary biology so incredible, that's since 1930. It's not 1850. And so the history of this is much more complicated, and it's far more interesting and fascinating. So that went on, and so that this has created the modern synthesis. But so this and that has taken the sort of attention away from the just are you a monkey or not? People got less interested in that. But this has continued, and it's still a major thing. And I think it was 1975, Ed Wilson wrote this wonderful big fat book called Sociobiology. And it was looking at what we understood about the evolution of social systems and living organisms, going everything from bacteria on up. And a wonderful book. And nobody had any trouble with octopi and rhinoceri. But the last chapter is human evolution. And that's when the fecal material hit the ventilating apparatus. All hell broke loose then. And because the idea that human genetics could be interesting, human genetics, how we were behaving, what we were doing. And interestingly, where the attack came was not, well, there was some from religion, but it was far left, the leftists, the communist leftists, and this was led by two very prominent biologists at Harvard, Richard Lewontin and Stephen Jay Gould, and you may know both. And they formed the Science for the People. They were the ones that caused their followers to go up and throw water and tomato juice in Ed Wilson's face and everything. There was this whole thing that attack on sociobiology and evolutionary biology from the communist left. Now, why was there such a big for the communist left? It's because the vision they had about the new society is that you could make the human participant anything you wanted. Never person, the new man or the woman, the person. There were no constraints on this, and what Ed Wilson and sociobiology and Darwin are saying, no, we're an involved organism. We got genetics. It's affecting what we do, and there are constraints on this, and we need to know about human genetics. and human behavior and how that works. So this was really an unbelievable attack that came and attacking all sorts of things, optimality modeling. I know both of these guys. I actually got caught up in a debate with Lewontin, something I was doing on optimality foraging, and he couldn't. That was something that was not permissible. That you optimality for the whole business of this. It really got ugly, and we're still coming out from that, where this is a politicization of science coming from the scientists. And this is awful, really, really bad. And we're still coming out of this, but mostly we've recovered. And Ed Wilson won, so to speak, this particular debate. But and this happens to be an area that I've spent a lot of time doing research on. My book on human evolution, and which is in the library. I was involved in participating in this. So anyway, this we did have an awful phase of anti-Darwinism coming from the political left and led by scientists, which is really sad, really, really sad. So that's still where we're having troubles with am I a monkey kind of thing. And so that's still, we're still having trouble with both of these things of this dangerous idea. One is that what's the meaning? Where's the meaning out there? And it basically says we want there to be meaning. People, we want the meaning in evolution. We want evolution, natural selection be for the survival of species. A lot of people want to think that. Well, it isn't. It says nothing about the survival of species. And besides, if that's what it's about, it's been a colossal failure. Well, over 90% of species that have ever lived have gone extinct. That's a pretty bad track record. Well, but that's not what it's about. It has nothing to do. But we want meaning like that. We want a moral arc in the universe that's somehow bending towards something. And the really dangerous thing about this, it says that ain't there. There is morality in the universe, but it's created by the evolution of complex societies of animals that develop ethical things, which is impossible to function in society without them. But morality has evolved, but it's biological processes and complex societies, particularly primates. And we're, of course, the most astounding example of that. And the other, we're still having trouble with, are we really only just a twig out there? Okay, we got big brains, but we're dependent utterly on plants, and plants tell us that you can have tremendous success with no brains at all. I find that kind of depressing, because I tend to, but we tend to, and I like my brain, but this whole thing says, look, there's another twig out there. This world isn't for you. And coming to grips with that still is hard. So the true problems, the major things that are dangerous about Darwin's idea, we're still grappling with. And it can sound pretty bad, but I've got hope. And Darwin was not a wonderful writer. You read, don't pick this up for easy reading, okay? But the last paragraph of the book, Darwin waxes a little bit eloquent. And I'd like to read to you the last paragraph from The Origin of Species. It is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing in the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. These laws, taken in the largest sense, being growth and reproduction, inheritance, which is almost implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct actions of the conditions of life, and from the use and disuse, a ratio of increase so high and so lead to the struggle for life, and as a consequence to natural selection, and entailing divergence of character and extinction of less improved forms. Thus, in the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted objects of which we are capable of conceiving, namely the productions of higher animals, directly follows. There's grandeur in this view of life, with its several forms, powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms into one, and in that whilst this planet has gone on cycling according to the fixed law of gravity from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Endless forms, most beautiful. Isn't that wonderful? And what's wonderful, not only we can now understand how this endless forms are being created. Each year we know more about this, and we know about human evolution, and we know where we came from and why we're here. We're getting answers to these great big questions, and it's marvelous to understand that we can comprehend. Our brains are such that not only we're making incredible progress in understanding this, and each year we know more. And to me, that's just an exciting, wonderful view of nature. It's that we can participate in this, we can understand this unfolding of things most diverse and beautiful. So, who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more?
Thank you, Dr. Orians of the past and Dr. Orians of the present, for a beautiful talk today. Very thoughtful, well organized, and an excellent presentation back then. And we look forward to a Q&A now. I'll go ahead and start the first question. My question relates to current times. One of the things I really enjoyed about your talk was just the politics of science and the pushback against scientific discoveries. And I feel like we're living in that time right now with vaccines and a number of other issues from one major side of political parties in the country. And I'm hoping that you can give me some hope. How in history have we overcome that resistance to a more scientific and advanced consensus?
This is indeed a very disturbing time. Where we have alternative realities, the belief in science. Everybody has their own realities, their own beliefs, and they're all experts. And that seems to have arisen and gotten a lot of political life, as you say, particularly in one of the major political parties in the United States. The only way I know we can overcome this is, one, we have to make certain the election goes a certain way in November. If it goes the wrong way, we're in for deep trouble. But we still got, even if it goes the right way, we're still a long way from getting an understanding of that you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own reality. And we got a lot of rebuilding to do. I'm sort of hopeful we might do it, but it's going to be a hard slog because we have gone a long way away from accepting that there is one scientific reality that is discoverable by the normal means, and there isn't any other.
Thank you. I'll point out one correction in the chat. I noticed this in your talk as well. In your talk, you had said that Richard Dawkins was the only one of the four horsemen still alive, but Sam Harris is still alive, as pointed out by David McMillan. Still does a weekly podcast, which humanists would enjoy. Let me go to Jules.
Thank you for the correction. I was wrong. Thank you.
Let's go to Jules with his hand up in the Zoom.
Okay, so your talk was overwhelming. I'm asking, I'm going to turn my question around to you. Where does Lamarckianism, which wasn't mentioned, he was critical in this idea of the giraffe reaching up and in some way creating changes in his genetics and passing those genetics on. That's therefore the offspring had long necks. Where does Kon-Tiki fit into your ecogeography? And where does epigenetics fit into the idea that you don't have to change genes, you have to change functionality of genes?
Well, the development of any multicellular organism is a triumph of epigenetics. All the cells of my body have the same genes. And the reason they become so different is how the genes are turned on and turned off by various modifiers. And that is the essence of epigenetics. And so any multicellular organism that exists is the triumph of epigenetics. The uncertainty is whether it affects future generations, because these modifications of what's turned on and turned off, again, are not passed on in the eggs and the sperm, because they're not a part of what was going on. So this is where there's a lot of uncertainty now, is the degree to which there's actually carryover from multiple generations. And there are reasons to believe that some of it could happen, but this is an area, I think, of great uncertainty and active research at the moment.
Let's go to, we have 3 questions at our live audience at the Friendly House. Let's go to question number 1.
The word evolution is probably older than Darwin. Where did it come from? I mean, what was evolving before Darwin got a hold of that word? The word evolution.
People have been aware and thought about evolution for a long time, but again, the question is, how could it possibly happen? And I think philosophers have grappled with this throughout Western history. And when you see design, which there clearly is there had to be a designer. And there was only one on offer, and that was some sort of god. And almost every society has had that. But it's clear that Darwin's idea of natural selection is what has been going on right from the beginning, from bacteria and everything else it's affected. And we can use Darwin's theory doesn't give us answers. It gives us a way to look at the question, how we have to frame it. It's a framing question, and all of what we do is dependent upon that sets the stage. That's what's admissible, what's not admissible. If I am offering explanations for some event, I'm not as free as we talk about us being free thinkers. We're not the free thinkers. It's the religious people that are free thinkers, because anything goes. I can't accept anything that violates laws of physics and physiology and biology. So I'm rather highly constrained. So what Darwinism does is it's a stage setter. It says, no, you can't consider this. No, you can't consider that. Yes, this is admissible. And that's what it has really done to sort of frame and limit the kinds of things that are acceptable in biological theorizing. I'm not sure that I've effectively answered your question. If I haven't, come back at me again.
That was fine. I was just more interested in the word itself and where that came from. Something must be evolving, maybe technology or society that people talked about way before then.
Let's go back to our Zoom audience and a question from the humanist with the ironic name, Mr. Al Christians.
Yes, Gordon, you mentioned in your talk the question of am I a monkey? That brings up the idea of identity. If you just look at the picture of us right here, I met my wife. I had to decide who I was going to be to her. Until even in Charles Darwin's time, most people on Earth never met anybody who didn't know who they were. But now we get to make up who we are. We get to decide who we want to be. And we have to decide who we want to be all the time. You know, I go to the grocery store to buy cat food for my cat, and I have 300 types of cat food to choose from. I have to decide what kind of person am I? So how is this new concept of who I am going to evolve? What's the rules of evolution for that? I mean, it seems like what we're getting is not very good. It seems like the advertisers are controlling us, or the psychologists or somebody. But how's that evolve, and how's it going to evolve?
Well, one of the things I do not have is a good crystal ball. And I'm not going to be in a good. We are certain. Well, one thing I want to say is that the whole business of making it a monkey is wrong. We're not monkeys. We're apes, and apes are very different from monkeys. Have been evolving for a much longer time. And one of the big differences, of course, is that apes do not have tails, and we don't have tails. But that's an aside. But what Darwinism does is making life more complicated in a way, because before that, if you wanted to know what was right, what was wrong, there was an ethics giver out there that laid down all the rules. What Darwinism done is that there are no such rules out there. We are governed, and we have evolved certain behavioral responses, because any highly social animal has to develop a lot of behavioral rules that enable things to get along, and we have them and other animals have them. But what it has really done is to open it up for the opportunities and the scariness. And I think that's why a lot of people have trouble, because Darwinism doesn't offer some nice answers to these things. You got to work it out. I think it's rather challenging, but it's scary, and evolution is still going on. But natural selection, for most part, is pretty slow, and the problems that we face now in dealing with the nuclear age and all of this sort of stuff, evolution isn't going to bail us out. We're not going to get any help out of that. We've got to deal with it, and it's.
Let's go to question number 2 at the friendly house.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Orians. I wonder if you would recommend any required classes in the school curriculum from kindergarten to high school that would help balance out the supernatural stories that school children get through religion classes and those kinds of things, to help spread the Darwin's dangerous idea more thoroughly in society.
The United States is rather unusual among all of the advanced technological societies that we have this deep religion problem. In Europe, this isn't a big issue. I'm not. I mean, and we're in the battle right now to be able even to teach evolution in classes, or to teach history as it actually worked out. We're going to revise and revamp history, and all of this is somehow coming from the religious right, which regards all these ideas as dangerous. And I have to confess that I'm not fully aware. I've been retired for a very long time, and I'm really not up to date on what's going on in various schools that help us teach stuff. So I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to really punt on that, because I really don't know. But right now in the United States, it's a battle to be able to open it up and just recently I saw an account that said now 51% of Americans believe in evolution. And this was a great thing that we just passed the 50% mark, but that means 49% don't. And that's the level at which we're trying to recover from. We got a long haul in the United States, and I'm sure that there's some interesting stuff going on in schools that I don't know because I've been retired for almost 30 years.
Stay at our live audience at the Friendly House and go to question number 3.
Thank you very much for this presentation. One of the later books that E.O. Wilson wrote was about humans evolving as a social animal. Do you think he made his point? Do you think we are evolved as a social animal? I don't know what science is doing about that at this point in time.
Yes, natural selection hasn't ended. We continue to evolve, but mostly there's some stuff goes really fast, but by and large, biological evolution is a pretty slow process. And adapting to our modern society and figuring out how to work in it, I don't think natural selection is going to help us very much. It's just too slow. We're going to have to work out our own thoughts and our own ideas how to do this. And natural selection it may deal with some certain things about lactose tolerance or something that can go pretty fast, but the kind of social stuff we're talking about, there's going to be selection on that, but it's far too slow to do anything to help us deal with how we're going to work our social, how we're going to think about it, how are we going to develop ways of getting along together in big societies where most of the people out there I'm never going to know, never will know, and I'm going to have to develop behavioral responses for reacting to millions of people I don't know. Natural selection isn't going to help us with that at all.
We now have a question number 4 at the Friendly House.
Yes, one can think of evolution and natural selection as a passing on of information, a passing on of genetic information about how to survive in the world. And I think that prior to human beings, the only way of passing on information was through the genes, was through genetics. But as human beings, we can now accumulate and pass on information through books, through videos, through learning. So to some extent, human beings have learned to bypass evolution, genetic evolution, because of our ability to accumulate and transfer information in a way that was never possible before the human brain evolved. And so I think in many ways, I'd like your thoughts on this, that really human beings have found a shortcut past natural selection, past normal evolution, because we're evolving our ideas much faster than natural selection allows.
Yeah, we haven't bypassed natural selection. We just added on something. And actually, the person, believe it or not, who developed this idea and coined the idea of memes was Richard Dawkins himself. And he's the one that helped us understand how fast ideas can expand. There's a sort of an equivalence to natural selection of ideas in the form of memes. And we haven't bypassed evolution. We've just added something else on, which is very fast and very powerful. And that's how ideas are changing rapidly now. It's in the form of these memes, and how we manipulate the memes and how we create memes that are genuinely useful. That's the big problem. So this is a new addition, but we haven't bypassed or left natural selection. It's just that it's going on too slowly. And the big things that we're dealing with now, we're dealing with non-genetic stuff. We're dealing with ideas that get passed on and adopted. And some of the ideas come up and they don't last. And so ideas, there's a natural selection of ideas in the sense that operates in many ways like natural selection of genes, but ever so much faster.
And Dr. Orians, I'll ask one more question as I wait for any final questions from our Zoom or our live audience at the Friendly House. I think it's important as we lose scientists and philosophers like Dr. Dennett, that we continue to read the great thinkers of our times. So if we were having this presentation 20 years from now, who's someone that you think we would be celebrating and someone we should be reading now?
As I've said, my crystal ball is pretty fractured. Things are changing so fast. I mean, I look at 5 years ago, we were thought, what are the big political problems and everything? That's not what we're talking about today. And I have seen no reason to believe that 10 years from now, what we're going to consider important are any things that are on the agenda today. So my view of education is that you try to develop minds that are open to information, are able to process them, that are able to and ready to solve the problems of tomorrow that are not the problems we even think about today. So I think the future is just so unknown to us. It's changing so fast that even if I look at what we thought was important 5 years ago, it doesn't bear any resemblance to what we're thinking about today. I can think of no reason why 5 years from now it's going to be any different. I'm sorry, I don't have a useful crystal ball to give you.
Totally understandable. Let's go to question number 5 at the Friendly House.
Could you explain again what the leftists were against and why?
Would you repeat that, please?
Could you explain again what the communist leftists were against and why?
Okay. The reason I think the leftists were so against it was that they had the idea that you could create a society and human beings don't have any evolutionary constraints or anything. They can adapt to and fit into anything you want. So you could create this society and you didn't have to think about anything that the way we are plumbed, the way we react, that would make any sort of difference. And so I think it was a thing that they didn't, the idea that there were constraints and we weren't going to be just malleable and could be plugged in anything you want. That was what Ed Wilson was saying, and that's what Darwinism say. No, we have a complicated evolutionary history that determines what we are. And my own research on snake sunrises and Shakespeare and the evolution of our stuff. There's a big history, the genetic history casts a long shadow. And so I think it was the fact that Darwinism says, no, you have to really think about human genetics and who we are. And there's just not this blank slate that can be slotted into anything that you want. And I think this was the thing that was the hardest for them to swallow, because they had the wonderful utopian view of the society they're going to create. And it wasn't going to happen, and it hasn't happened. In some ways, I wish it could happen, but it's not. Did I get to answer your question properly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Orians, I do have another question of clarification from Gretchen Queeg. It's not that long of a question, so I'll read the whole thing. She writes, please say more about your comment that females somehow drive evolution. In human society, many women are under such tight control that they have little or no choice of their mates. Unapproved matings can be punished by death.
Okay, the point I was making is that the theory of sexual selection was, as it turns out, who's making the discriminations, and it was not that, it was the theory of sexual selection, and that the ones doing the discriminating, and this is we now well know, it's in sexual selection, it's female driven. It still is, and it's now generally accepted. But that's a narrow thing. That's not about female dominance and female running things anywhere else. It's just that a particular component of evolution, namely sexual selection, it was discrimination by females that was the driver, and that's all.
Sounds good. Let's go to question number 6 at the friendly house.
What was driving the objections of Lewontin and Stephen Jay Gould? Don't you think that part of it was because of their concern that racists were taking the scientific ideas of E.O. Wilson and using them as justification for saying that certain races were inferior to other races?
There is genetic variation, and we're rather different, and you can see there's a lot of variation around the world. The problem was that people were using it to argue for superiority of certain people, and namely the people who were doing the writing was Europeans, and so there was just a lot of work trying to show or use scientific evidence that a particular group of human beings were superior to the others, and then that was used as a basis for subjugation and dominance, that it was okay because they were really inferior and you had a God-given right to exploit them. But it was very useful in particular because, you know, when the Europeans went around the world colonizing other people, there was a God-given right because you were superior to them, and therefore it's okay to do that, and that also makes everybody else look maybe they're a little less human than you are. But what the truth is that all that genetic variation has absolutely nothing to do with who's superior or not. And as a matter of fact, those of us Caucasian types that are descended from a very small group of Africans that crossed up into Asia, bearing a very tiny fraction of genetic variability in human beings with us. The vast source of genetic variability in human beings today is found in Africa, and we're seeing how it's wonderfully playing out in their ability to excel in certain areas. So in many ways, those of us that came from that little impoverished extension have a lot of humble pie to eat.
Our questions are multiplying and evolving with every sentence you speak here, Dr. Orians. Let's go to question number 7 at the friendly house.
I worry that this might be another one of those crystal ball questions, but I read a book several years ago maintaining that the American society, the U.S. American society, was going through its period of adolescence, that we were the adolescent Americans, and the Europeans and the Asians had figured out these questions about how to live together and also on how to not, I guess as adolescents, we think we get to do whatever we please. And there are some limitations we need to be mature. So does it seem like silliness, or does there seem something to that?
Well, we are remarkable among any animal in how long it takes to grow up. And those of you that have had kids like I have, you know, God, are they ever going to fledge? You know, 20 years. So we have what is we are born with a poorly developed brain and has to do a lot of developing after birth compared to any other organism. Doesn't have to do an incredible amount of work, and that is probably the most distinctive feature of human evolution is, and we couldn't be born with any bigger brains because there's a constraint on being able to pass the birth canal and to have a female that can still run and do stuff. And so there's been an evolutionary constraint, and we're ending up doing an enormous amount brain development, and the brain is still developing in different ways when we're 20. And so in many ways, we are having extended infantility, infant behavior. And this is a real big problem because legally, how should you treat a kid now that we've got kids that are shooting adults with automatic weapons? How should we treat them behaviorally? So we got a big problem, and it's in human beings in general, not just in the United States, because this is a feature, an amazing feature of human development, that we're born with very incomplete brains, and we do an awful lot of brain development, and it's still going on at age 20. And there's no other species that's anything like that. It's a gift, and also gives us a chance to learn things late, but it's also a huge problem.
I think that's a good note to end on. Dr. Orians, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time today. You are an incredibly important voice on this topic, and we're always so happy to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure. I always enjoy meeting you personally or in Zoom, and I wish you all well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.